Hey, Hunters, HaloZoo here for another look into the 1D or not 1D&D, my D&D 6e concept. This time we're going to look at the class ideas I have for the base 12. So this isn't going to go into the extra 12, which for this would be the same as D&D 5.5. I like the ideas I have there, so I'm bringing them over. And most of those will probably end up being somewhat similar to what I would make here, though that is subject to changes, like especially because this would be a very different system, so things could be shaken up a bit more. uh but of course, this is just like a base concept. Not going to be listing any like specific archetypes for the most part. That's currently the idea, is something very similar to what the 5.5 roster would look like, but that is subject to change. I could easily go a bit further with the changes, but the idea is probably to go a bit similar to them because it is a good list. Uh, but as a quick note before we begin, each class will have their hit die. That is the size of their various hit dice, and the starting HP would be the maximum number of that die plus their con score. So that is skills. I did not list, mostly for space constraints, but and making it readable. But that's also something that's like not entirely sure how I'll do that. I could do something more like Pathfinder 2e, where there is no skill list or like class skill list. Instead, it's you might get some skills innately, but you have a number that you know, and that's the number you know. But that's not going to be worried about. Also, not going to be listing much about how they'll buff defenses. That is something I have not thought of yet, but like skills and tools, not going to be listed, but it will list at wills. Cantrips if a class has them, which is the 6 full casters. Uh, and then what their daily type of ability is, with one exception. And then also there will be what the primary and secondary archetypes are titled. So each has a title for this is what your primary archetype is called, this is what your secondary archetype is called, many of which have fighting styles, but that's just the way it is. And then there'll also be a little blurb of some other stuff. And I've also listed weapon and armor proficiencies, one of which is definitely not final. The rest, some of which could be changed. Specifically, any that have specific martial weapons that they get. Those are, or just specific weapons in general, those are completely up for changing. But anyway, let us begin with the barbarian, because of course we're going alphabetically. So they will have simple and martial weapons, as you'd expect. They have light armor, they have medium armor. They'll also go from bucklers to light shields to heavy shields. So they have all but tower shields and heavy armor. So they've got very good armor. Not sure if unarmored defense will return, but I'll probably end up bringing back the con for AC thing, or something like it, where you can use con with light or medium armor from 5.5, just to help their defenses a bit more. D12 hit dice still. The hit dice are actually unchanged from 5e. It's just how your max HP will be determined to start off with. That is different. It's the 5.5 system, which is based off 4th edition, because that's just the best system there's ever been, because adding con score is so much nicer. So good. But barbarians will only have 3 at-will powers. So you'll have 3 to 5. Barbarians are one of the 4 classes that doesn't really get a lot in that department. So they only get 3. But, I mean, you don't really need that much, since your class, it's about doing one thing and doing that really good. So, the extra versatility, nah, you're a barbarian. You don't need that. You just need a couple ways to hit things very hard and you're good, right? Martial exploits are their daily resource thing. So this is like spellcasting. They learn these, like most classes with martial exploits, as in most of the 4. However, they are only using them with strength. As of now, they're one of the 2 classes that only use it with a certain stat. For them, it is strength. Their primary archetypes are called warrior paths. So these include stuff like Path of the Berserker, Path of the Wild Heart. I believe Storm Herald was one I wanted to do, and then originally I thought of Dervish, but I think I ended up going Zealot. I don't know. The 4th one's subject to change, but there will be 4. So you are going to get Berserker, which I'll talk about a bit more in a moment. Secondary archetype, fighting style. Most martials, with one exception, will have a fighting style, so you basically just get to pick a fighting style. You're better with that type of weapon. So, it's what you'd want anyway. So, nothing fancy, but oh well. As for the other notes, so they're based on using rage still. That will still be a daily resource, in addition to your martial exploits. It helps you hit harder and absorb damage still. So, pretty much roughly what it's doing in 5e. It will give you resistances. And you'll have access to various abilities and rages called rage talents. To go even crazier. So, rage talents are your analog to encounter resources. Barbarians are technically the only class that lack one. However, every time you pop into a rage, you will have access to a few rage talents for that rage. So you'll have some limited use abilities, but you'll basically get to use these a few times, and rather than have to worry about a short rest, you just have to worry about the next time you rage. So they can actually skip short rests, but you'll probably want it for the healing. So you're based around using rages and using the rage talents. It won't come with the risk/reward stuff that Pathfinder has by default. So the classic AC penalty is not there. However, if you have seen 5.5 stuff, you might have noticed I mentioned that there, the idea I had was giving Berserkers in their frenzy the AC penalty instead of the exhaustion, as a way of like, oh yeah, you enter a frenzy, but now you have an AC penalty. And that will actually be a flat defense penalty to all 4 defenses. Don't know if it'll affect saving throws, but I may also have it affect just AC and reflex. So basically you would lose your shields bonus, or a heavy shields bonus to AC if you pop it frenzy. But you basically get to go crazy. So there is that there. It won't be default though. So it's more of a 5e rage by default. Albeit it'll be a bit different because resistances don't work the same. Though I could go for resilience and keep the original, but it's subject to change. It's just concepts anyway, so it doesn't matter. The Bard. So, bards, they have access to simple weapons as well as the longbow, longsword, rapier, saber, scimitar, and short sword. The saber, for reference, it's a slashing rapier. That's all it is. It is a finesse slashing weapon. So they have the 3d8 swords. It's what you'd expect. They have light armor and bucklers. The bucklers are a new shield type that is basically just a very light type of shield. They have d8 hit dice still. They only get 3 at wills, but have the high number of 5 cantrips. So you have a lot of utility, but very limited combat options as a bard, which does fit with them very well. This also means that, yeah, you will not be forced to take Vicious Mockery with one of your very limited cantrips known. You will have freedom. And it also allows them to have more versatility, which does fit what the class does as a whole, in my opinion. Also, they are a full caster as their daily resource, so you can cast spells, but you now prepare from a spell book. So this is an idea I want to implement into 5.5 as well, probably. Though I may just have them straight up prepared. But the idea here is that you have this book of songs, basically, that you prepare your spells from. And you prepare these various, like, little songs and melodies that you use to cast your spells. Though, as we'll talk about later, that's not necessarily what you're doing. But the idea is that you, in mechanical terms, you have a spell book, you're still a charisma caster, but you're able to prepare spells and actually use the full extent of the utility your list has for spells. It is absurd just how jank Bard is because it's a learned caster. It's stupid. And it's, while I may not like Bards, I do have to admit, I do think they're just not good at using their list to its full potential. So, you now get to prepare spells. That should mean you have a lot more versatility when it comes to what utility you take, and it should free you up to do that more. So, hopefully that's a good thing, and also hoping this comes back in 1D&D, because that's what actually inspired it. It's like the one good thing they did. But, yeah. Prepared Bard casting. Boom. As for your primary archetype, Bard at college, it's what you'd expect. They're still around and are this, like, philosophy that you follow. The secondary archetype, though, artistic specialty. So, this is basically choosing, are you a musician? Are you a dancer? Are you a poet? Or are you a painter or something? This will affect how you do your spell casting and stuff. For example, a dancer just starts moving around the battlefield as they're casting spells. It's like, so whenever you cast a spell of first level or higher, for example, you might end up being able to shift 5 feet and basically move without provoking opportunity attacks, or do all sorts of stuff. Like, I'll probably let them have Oto's Irresistible Dance baseline, because it's too fun for dance bards to have that. As I said there, it's like, I don't care if it's actually worth using or makes sense with what else they're doing. It's too fun not to give it to them. But the idea is that you have various things that affect how you approach spellcasting, themed around what your artistic specialty is. So, if you use music, you perform things end up a certain way. Like, you might have the ability to mix some concentration spells together as like mix some spells together for and like chorus and verse or something. But basically have stuff that manipulates how you cast your spells based on what type of performances you do, which I think is something that has been underrepresented in D&D and tabletop RPGs in general. So here it's like, yeah, using the secondary archetype system will let you do that. And that's in addition to your bardic college. So you could be the College of Lore, which is more of a dedicated caster, which, you know, would be more focused on the casting aspect and using your magic to its full potential. Whereas a College of Valor bard could also use the various ones, and it affects it as well, as a dancer would have more mobility as they cast spells, which is very useful for darting between enemies in melee. Whereas if you're doing the song one, that would have other bonuses to the spells that would help you do what you want to do. What exactly they do is not set in stone, besides the fact that dance bards will involve movement in some way. But let's be honest, like, of course they do. You can't stand still as a dancer. But as for the other notes, the Master of Support and Control ballads, which is their encounter ability resource, offer a variety of ways to buff allies and hinder enemies, including Bardic Inspiration. So rather than have Bardic Inspiration and you have all these uses for it, you have the ballads, which are also going to be linked to your artistic specialty. So these will link into that and will affect how you use ballads. So they are called ballads by default, but you could change the name to, like, you know, a painting or something. But basically, it's how you affect the battlefield around you. It's how you use your performances to do stuff. And you basically have these little performances that are quick. And you do a few of them each combat. And they have various things that they do. So it's kind of a mixture of bardic music and bardic inspiration. But that's what they do for their encounter abilities. Up next is the Cleric. By default, they only have simple weapons. They have light armor, medium armor, bucklers, light shields, and heavy shields. But monks are a class that can change that up. They have the D8 hit dice. They only get 3 at wills and only 4 cantrips, so they are less versatile than bards, but they offer a bit more utility than offensive options. They are full casters, still preparing spells, still using wisdom. It's how they've always played. So, what did you expect? They primarily have a Divine Domain as their primary archetype. So that system returns. Just because I feel like it's a more useful system, as it allows for infinitely better balance and actually balancing the game and making it where the deity is more of an aesthetic choice, which is what I prefer it stays as, because yeah, the Pathfinder system, what the hell was Paizo thinking with that? It is a pile of jank in Pathfinder 2e by default. Thankfully, it has changed to be a bit improved. Spell system still sucks. I'm going to be blunt. I don't know what they were thinking, making it where there's no set in stone level of spells you get. It's stupid. But your secondary archetype, Holy Doctrine. What did you expect? It's the Doctrine concept that is taken from Pathfinder 2e and 1D&D. It's now here. yeah, it's just a good system that works. So these will offer you extra proficiencies, potentially extra magic as well, depending on the one you choose. So there's going to be 4 by default. There will be one that is the dedicated caster, getting an extra skill and cantrip, or at will. They might have it be at will and cantrip, plus the skill, but that's subject to change. But basically, you get more casting stuff. There will also be one which gets heavy armor, possibly an extra cantrip too, but they will get access to heavy armor. You will not get tower shields. That is being kept to the 2 classes that default to them. There will be one for only martial weapons, which is more of a ranged slash very aggressive attacker. And then you have the kind of war priest that we know and love, which gets martial weapons and heavy armor, with the zealot, as I'll call them, which has the martial weapons only. They will probably... They could actually get an extra cantrip while... Yeah, as well. They could also get an extra skill. Subject to some change, but the general idea is there that there will be 4 of them by default, and you'll have a varying combination of extra spell stuff, martial weapons, heavy armor, or both martial weapons and heavy armor. And of course, they're still considered the masters of healing, so they'll have a very good support toolkit. And they can still use Channel Divinity to call on their deity's power to aid them in battle. Do note, however, that you will actually have 2 Channel Divinities by default. One from your domain, one from your holy doctrine. So that does mean we will see the return of the idea that you have a kind of like turn undead style spell based on your doctrine. So basically the various divine classes in 4e had different ways of, like, slightly different variations of the turn undead stuff. Like, Avengers as a melee damage dealer had the ability to pull undead to them. Invokers could blast a bunch and push them back, while clerics had access to both the classic turn undead, which like hits a bunch around them and pushes them back, or a smite undead, which lets them use their weapon to whack an undead and push them back. Similar idea is going to be here. So of course, War Priest has the smite undead. Whatever the basic one is, the dedicated caster, they will have turn undead, while the other 2 will have... Zealot would probably have Abjure undead, which is the pull. Rebuke would probably be to the Templar, which is the heavy armor, and that is the push in a cone. But it's subject to change. Like, it might be that I give Templars the turn undead while the dedicated casters get Rebuke as a way to reach further with it, but that's the basic idea, that you'd have one from your holy doctrine. Also note, clerics will actually have some alignment restrictions, but it's only about the deity. So, and this is something I like having as a thing, where it's something you'd probably do anyway, but it's the idea that you can only follow a deity within 1 step of your alignment. So a deity isn't going to give, like, a lawful good deity isn't going to give powers to a chaotic evil person. Like, that doesn't make sense. They're lawful good. That's the exact opposite of what they believe in, and as a result, they're not going to give power to them, obviously. And similarly, a neutral character is probably not going to get a lot out of following a lawful good deity, as they don't really have either aspect of that deity's portfolio. Whereas a lawful neutral or neutral good character would share some common ground with that deity's ideology and stuff, and thus the deity would be more willing to lend power to someone who is good and or lawful. So, but not someone who is evil or chaotic. So that's the basic idea there, that there are alignment restrictions, but it's just you have to be in one step of the deity you choose. So it's a simple one, but it's a more fair one. It's none of the BS that we've seen in the past. It's none of the stupid, paladins are lawful good, even though there is nothing explicitly lawful about them. Or the stupid, oh yeah, you want to play a certain alignment with your champion? Well, you're stuck with a certain set of abilities, and that's it. Or if you want to play a certain set of abilities, we hope you like this alignment, and it matches your character. Load of crap, but I do like this alignment restriction. More because it's like, it's, of course you should, like, if you're following someone who has a certain alignment, your alignment should fall in line with theirs. It is one that feels more natural, and it fits within flavor. And it's like there's a clear reason for it to exist. It's not just some arbitrary thing. It's something that, yeah, like, you can't really follow a good deity if you're evil, or vice versa. That's not how they work. You kind of need to match their ideology, or you're not getting powers from that deity. Anyway, moving on to Druid. They have access to simple weapons, the longbow, scimitar, and short sword. Longbow's just there because why not? Helps them with hunting. They have access to light armor, medium armor, bucklers, and light shields. They have the D8 hit dice. They will have 5 at-wills. And this I'll mention in a moment, but basically, they do have 5 at-will powers with some restrictions. So they're one of the 2 classes that have that. As while there are 4 with 5 at-wills, 2 of them have some restrictions, while the other 2 have no restrictions and are the full 5. They will have access to 4 cantrips, though, so they are a very versatile caster class. By far one of the 2 most versatile in terms of what options they can have at any given time. Daily abilities, full caster, prepared, wisdom. It's the classic. It's what it's always been. Primary archetype, Druidic Circle still. It's a system that fits, and it works well, let's say. Secondary archetype will be their primal aspect. So the idea behind the primal aspect is this is something kind of coming from 4E, but with a twist, where instead of being the be-all, end-all of the class, instead it's kind of a way of mixing in going in a certain direction. So there will be 4 at launch, with 3 of the current ones planned is going to be the Predator, Guardian, and Swarm. So, talking about Predator versus Guardian real quick. A Predator Druid is going to be more aggressive. Whether they are Circle of the Moon or land as a wild-shaped martial or a dedicated caster, you're going to be more aggressive with your spells. You focus on a more offensive aspect to the class rather than using it for defense or support or something else. Guardian, meanwhile, would be more defensive. They focus on either protecting others or themselves, and basically being a lot harder to kill, as well as making their party harder to kill. And then Swarm, meanwhile, would be more controlling. They seek to control the battlefield, locking foes down. and all that stuff. So that's the idea of the primal aspect, and it mixes with the druidic circle to make your druid a very unique one, which is the whole idea of the system. But it's kind of a 1-2 punch of how do you play your druid? Like, what role do you want to play? And then also, what type of druid do you want to play? But in the other notes, here we have Masters of the Wild. This class can use various nature's gifts, abilities to aid them, including Wild Shape, which will allow them to dive into melee if they want to. So Wild Shape is still here. And you will have access to at least one power you can use in beast form. So it will have its own set of at-will powers that you can use. One has to be not beast form, so you're always going to have one option in any form. So if you're in your caster form, you'll have a power that you can use to attack with. If you're in beast form, you will have a power you can use to attack with. But the other three are completely your choice. You could go a more balanced way and have like 2 beast, 3 caster, or 2 caster, 3 beast powers. Or you could just go like all in on one and go like 4 beast powers and just the 1 caster power, or vice versa with 4 caster powers but only 1 beast power. Probably if you're circle land for beast powers and then moon for caster and dropping caster powers. Cantrips are form agnostic, but also note there will be spells of first level and higher for beast form as well. Those will be a separate thing that will only exist on the druid spell list, though there may be another class in the warden that might grab the beast at wills with a certain subclass, but it's conceptual stuff, but they might be able to get them. But right now, with the base 12, the beast at wills and spells, druid exclusive. The fighter! Simple and martial weapons, light armor, medium armor, heavy armor, bucklers, light shields, heavy shields, and tower shields. So just all the armors, D10 hit dice, and they have 5 at-will powers. But, unlike all but one other class, they get to prepare them each day. So, then you have martial exploits as well. And, unlike the other 3 with martial exploits, you have this thing called a manuscript. What's a manuscript? Well, I mean, it's a spellbook for martial exploits. That's the simple terms for it. But the idea is that you have this manuscript. It has a list of exercises you can do, and it's not necessarily like writing in words. Similar to how I described the spellbook for bards, where it's actually like songs or dances or some other thing linked to your artistic style. Here, you have this like, this manuscript that describes various martial techniques that list these exploits you can use. And you can use strength or dexterity for them. So you can actually choose them. And this will be based on whatever... So I think I will let you choose this at first level. This is subject to change, of course, because it could be that I just make martial exploits by default. Just match whatever matches the weapon you're using. But right now the idea is that barbarians are strength only. Fighters can choose based on what they're doing. Monks will also be able to choose. And rogues. I mean, obviously rogues are going to be the dex only one. Anyway, the primary archetype for fighter is martial orders. This is something I switched over to in 5.5 because I felt like they needed something special for them. So, martial order is what I decided to call the fighter archetypes. But yeah, it's fighter archetypes. It's roughly the same as they were before, probably. Of course, that is what they were in 5.5, aka champion is nowhere to be seen, as you might be able to tell. Secondary archetype, though, is going to be your first fighting style, and fighters are the only class with the tertiary getting a second fighting style. This is one of the things from champion. I'm like, this should just be base to fighter. It works so well, but as for the other notes, still the basic, quote-unquote basic, martial. They offer a more basic ability set with various combat talents, each of which has separate uses. So combat talents are your encounter resources. This will be stuff like Action Surge, Second Wind, etc. Because I don't know if I'm adding more, but it's basically like they have separate uses. You don't have to worry about, do I use one or the other? You can just use both. It's fine. But the idea is that while they may be a more quote-unquote basic class, the idea here is it's leaning into that mastery of being the master of martial combat. Like, sure, you're the most basic, but you're also the most versatile by far. You're one of the only two classes that can change their at-wills each day. You're the only class that actually prepares martial exploits. Sure, you may have less at any given time, or less available to you to choose from, and you might lack some of the better options in certain fields, like barbarians will have the best for dealing massive damage, monks will have the best for mobility, rogues will have the best for trickery and control, but fighters have a variety of all three types of exploits from the other classes, plus they will be the only ones at launch with the tactic-based exploits and the support-based ones. So you will also have that available to you. And you have a second fighting style. You know, you're not just sticking to one fighting style like every other class with them as a secondary archetype. Instead, you have two fighting styles, which means you're adding a lot more versatility, where it's not like, oh, I only favor this one type of weapon in this one style of fighting. Instead, it's like, oh yeah, I have the one, but I've also trained a bit in another, and while it will still be worse, as you'll only have two abilities from the tertiary, rather than 4 from the secondary, so it's exponentially smaller in feature count, but you're still getting a second fighting style. It's like, you can still mix in, like, maybe you have great weapon fighting and then take archery. You know, you have access to better ranged attacks with non-thrown weapons. I don't know why you picked that, but why not, you know? And it basically lets you mix and match stuff from two different fighting styles to basically make yourself a bit better in combat and more versatile in combat. And kind of, you know, make them more interesting for players who want something more intricate, and there's a lot to love here, but it still has that approachability, and it's, you know, it's basic on its surface, but it has a lot more going on in the nitty-gritty details where it's like, okay, this has a lot of depth to it as well. Next up, the monk. Weapons is just simple, it's subject to change. Armor, none. They have unarmored defense though, so you will have crazy AC. Also, currently, the idea is that the stat cap for unarmored, which is normally +6, that will count for dexterity and wisdom separately. Meaning, you are one of the 3 classes, beside fighter and paladin, who can get to the +12 AC which is only available through plate armor and or the max armor of a tier and a tower shield. So normally you need a tower shield to do it. Monks just do it without. So yeah. And I kind of like the idea that, yeah, you do get the plus 12 AC. Just because it's like, yeah, why not? Let them go crazy. Still have the D8 hit dice, though. That could be increased, but I kind of lean on not having that, because you do get way faster movement and unarmored defense, which is kind of crazy in this system. In the context that, yeah, no, it gets you one of the 3 highest ACs without feats and without taking anything else into account except items. And you don't even need items. You just need to level up enough to get plus 6 dex and whiz. That's it. For at-wills, I decided that they didn't want to be very low on versatility in combat, but there was I didn't think it needed to have a bunch compared to anyone else. So it's in the middle. It's at 4. They also have martial exploits. They only learn them, unlike fighters, but most do learn them. So they're like barbarian and rogue. And they can choose between strength or dex like the fighter could. So you can be a strength monk. And I think I may also allow you to use strength for unarmored defense, but that might be a class feat. I don't know. It's an option, but currently the idea is that, yeah, it will be on offer to you. If you want to be a strength monk, you can be a strength monk. Primary archetype will be their monastic way. It's what the current ways are, so you'll still have Way of the Open Hand, Shadows, Elements, Kensei, etc. And that will probably be the base for here, for certain. But there is also the style philosophy. So yeah, this is a martial class with something that isn't fighting style. But the reason for that is the fighting styles aren't really designed for a class like this, where they don't really use specific types of weapon as much, as they are capable of fighting unarmed. That's a big thing they do, as they're like the experts of martial arts, capable of striking fast and hard, armed or unarmed. And their encounter abilities are now key powers, which just let them stretch the limits of what a humanoid is capable of. Basically, it's what you'd expect from key powers. It's stuff like the big flurry of blows, and all sorts of stuff. But the style philosophy, what that is basically a kind of like what you'd actually consider a fighting style to be. It's like sort of kung fu versus taekwondo, stuff like that, where you have different ways of approaching combat, and it's more of a philosophical thing to make it like, it's not just about combat, it's about how you view certain things as well. But it's kind of this idea of, do you practice a more flowing fighting style where you're more mobile, you're constantly in motion, as well as making sure your enemies are in constant motion as you move them about, and it's a more controlling style? Are you more reactive, being a defensive, adopting a more defensive fighting style, where when an enemy attacks you or attempts to attack you, you suddenly counterattack and hit them back? Or are you a more like, hit them once really hard fighting style, where you prefer a few harder strikes? Or do you just go crazy and make a bunch of attacks to overwhelm your opponent's defenses? Even though each attack might be lighter, there's very little you can do when like 30 attacks are coming at you very quick. So that's kind of the idea with the style philosophies. And these can mix with your monastic way. Way of the open hand, of course, would be more, you're using this with unarmed attacks. You're using this with your fists, your feet, your head, your tail if you have one, all sorts of stuff. But basically, you fight unarmed and you have these different ways of fighting. But you could also use these styles as a kensei. Perhaps you're blocking with your blade before counterattacking, or you're quickly striking a bunch with your sword in that classic flourishing slashes. Or you could be Way of the Elements, and suddenly you're unleashing a storm. Like a just hailstorm of icy cold. Or maybe it's a massive blast of fire that batters your foes. And all sorts of stuff like that, where it allows you to have a certain play style. And current idea is to kind of bring back the idea behind 4th edition Flurry of Blows, where you had a Flurry of Blows power that you always had access to, and it was an at will, actually. So you got to use it every turn when you attacked, but they had different ones for the different builds. So if you were Stone Fist, you had the Stone Fist Flurry of Blows. If you were Centered Breath, you had Centered Breath Flurry of Blows. And here, the idea as of now would be to give that to the style philosophy, where each style has its own version of Flurry of Blows. So you have one that is making multiple hits, but each hit is actually a bit weaker. Or you have the powerful one, which doesn't even get Flurry of Blows. They just upgrade the attack they already did. There's the reactive one, which is in reaction to damage. So basically you enter a defensive stance, and then you get to counterattack people. And then the controlling one has one that lets them move stuff around. So it's both yourself and enemies. And you're just moving around with that. But that's an idea that I have for that currently. Subject to change, of course, but I do like the idea that you have this very, rather than just have one way that Flurry of Blows works, instead you have various different ways it could work, where it's like, oh, are you making a ton of attacks, or are you making a few more powerful attacks, and stuff like that. So that's the idea behind the monk. Up next is the paladin. Simple and martial weapons, all of the armor, just like fighters, so that is going up to heavy armor and up to tower shields. D10 hit dice, only 4 at wills. Once again, they kind of felt like I kind of felt like giving them more versatility than rogues and barbarians, but I didn't really want to elevate them to the same level as fighter in particular, and then ranger. So it ended up kind of being in the middle, where it's like, you're not restricted in options. You have a variety, but you won't really have a great arsenal either. And heaven forbid you compare it to the versatility of a fighter in at-wills. You don't win that. They are the kings of at-wills. They're also a half-caster, so they don't get the martial exploits. They just get spell casting, but half of it. They're prepared, and they use charisma. It's what you'd expect. They still have their sacred oath, which is at first level, you're welcome. Still use a fighting style as their secondary, so that is all returning. There won't really be alignment restrictions here, with the exception that if you follow a deity, you follow the same rules as a cleric. And in fact, everyone has those rules. It's just that it matters directly to clerics because you have to have a deity as a cleric. Paladin, they regularly do have a deity, but it's not as mandatory and central to the class's identity as it is cleric, so it's mentioned there, not here. Their holy warriors can mend wounds of themselves or others, and all sorts of other stuff using Conviction, which is a special resource they will access in combat. So basically, Lay on Hands is now, so the Lay on Hands pool is now the Conviction pool, which, yeah, Lay on Hands will be a part of that, but there will be other abilities you will have that use this Conviction, which is your encounter resource. So basically, you have this resource you use to power various abilities. It might play similar to Lay on Hands in 5e, not sure yet, but I do like the idea that it would do that. It's just you have a smaller pool per day, or like at any time, but you get it back with a short rest now. And Sacred Oath, it's Sacred Oath. On to my favorite, the Ranger. Simple and martial weapons. They get light armor, medium armor, bucklers, and light shields, basically like a druid. They have D10 hit dice, and they have 5 at-will powers. But you do have to pick one that can be used with melee weapons and one that can be used with ranged weapons. So, you have the 5 at-wills, but unlike fighters, you're not as versatile. You have a more limited arsenal. Once again, kind of like druids, actually. They're also half-casters, and they prepare them now, since preparing is just so much better for utility stuff. And they're wisdom-based still. Primary archetype, Ranger Conclave. Returning from the fixed Ranger from a UA a long time ago. The Conclave terminology returns, so it's what the Ranger archetypes are right now in 5e, kind of. Some changes will probably happen, like Hunter is probably going to be changed to something very different, but then again, in the context of this 6th edition concept, it doesn't really make sense. But, you know, Beastmaster would be here as well. And it's basically just like, you know, you have this Conclave that is your primary archetype. It's roughly what it is now. Secondary fighting style, as you'd expect, they're martial. They have fighting styles. Other notes, expert trackers. They can use hunter's skills to mark a target down and focus fire on them, as well as doing all sorts of other useful tricks. So this might change up. I might just give them Hunter's Quarry back from 4th edition. Favorite enemy is not going to be here, by the way. Favorite enemy will be in the feats. Period. It sucks. It's not fun as a main class feature. So it's getting shoved to the feats, where it actually fits way better. But the idea is that Hunter's Mark will not be a spell. That is also for certain. It's not a spell. It doesn't take up spell slots. It's not taking up spells prepared. And all that jank. Instead, it's just baked in to part of just being a ranger. Currently, it's part of the Hunter's skills, which means that, and this is your encounter resource, so you'll have these various tricks you can pull out, such as a Hunter's Mark, where you mark target to do more damage to. You might also have more defensive uses, like you might have a special disengage that you can do. You might have a camouflage ability. You might have a just a super track ability, where you can spot stuff easier. You might be able to place traps with this. You might heal your beast if you're a Beastmaster, or have some other pet. And all sorts of other stuffs, but, you know, it's kind of like the arbitrary, hey, this is your encounter resource, but it's currently going to be linked to Hunter's Mark / Quarry, just because I think it fits fine there. That could be just a thing you can do at will, but I like the idea that it's part of this as well. So it's like, okay, well, I can either have multiple marks out, or I can use all sorts of other abilities and stuff. But that, you know, it's subject to change. It's just a concept, but that's my idea for now. Rogues. They use simple weapons, hand crossbows, rapiers, sabers, scimitars, and short swords. They have light armor and the new bucklers, so they get some defensive options if they want them. They have the D8 hit dice, only 3 at-will powers, as the other martial that has that. You don't have a lot of variety when it comes to combat options, but you do specialize in a very particular area, so you are more focused than others, and you have a lot of melee or ranged abilities, unlike the ranger. So you have some versatility there. You have martial exploits, which you have to learn, and you use your dexterity only for them. Then again, you were dex-based anyway. You're a rogue. Primary archetype is the Roguish Guild. This is something I also used in 5.5 because I felt like it just added some flavor. Where it's like, oh yeah, you got the Thieves Guild stuff. Kind of brought back in thematically. But otherwise, it's about what the archetypes are now. Secondary fight, you get fighting styles now. Just because it kind of fits with the idea of martials. The only exception is Monk, but they work a bit differently mechanically, so that is why they have a different one. But for rogues, it kind of made sense that you can choose to be like, dual wielding, using archery, going for the dueling style, or going for thrown weapons. It just fits in nicely, I think. Adept at subterfuge, there's still the master sneaks. You can sneak attack for big damage. I mean, obviously that was staying. But cunning action is now their encounter resource. So it'll be a more tactical tool to get them through fights with various tricks. So you will have way more limited cunning action. So it's a resource now, but it's not necessarily going to be what it was before. This might also get some intermixing with the new cunning strikes stuff that was introduced in 1D&D, which is really interesting. But that also means it won't actually take sneak attack damage anymore. So you will have this with cunning action instead. Mostly because it just fits better there. As the way it works in 1D&D, it's cool, but you have at-wills. So it's going to be moved to cunning action, and that stuff would probably show up there. But basically, you've got various tricks you can pull out from your sleeve and use to your advantage, such as, suddenly disappearing quickly, just darting across the battlefield real quick. Not as good as a monk will be in that regard, but at least you're stealthier. And some other stuff. The Sorcerer. Currently, I've given them all simple weapons. Could knock them back down a peg, but it's subject to change, of course. No armor, still. D6 hit dice, but they have 5 at-will powers. Note that they don't prepare them, because you learn spells as a full caster, using Charisma, of course. And they only have 3 cantrips, because, you have lots of raw power, not much refinement, and fine control in comparison to other casters. And that's a way of, reflecting that idea that they have a lot of raw power, but not as much utilitarian capabilities. Primary archetype, Sorcerer's Bloodline. It's kind of what you expect. It's the origin of your power, and it's your bloodline. So, yeah. Secondary style, though, is casting style. So, you might be more of a blast an area caster, or a more I'm going to, lay some controlling stuff down, or you might be a more single target, really hurt that guy caster. And that's kind of the idea here, where you take on a certain preference for combat. Like, are you controlling the battlefield, or are you going more for damage? And if you are going for damage, are you going more single target or AoE? And kind of going with that idea of, you have these different styles of casting. So you can be more widespread destruction, just annihilating a single foe. There may also be one that's getting up close in kind of the mid-range of combat, which you're probably mixing with Draconic Bloodline, because Why not? Or you might go more battlefield control. But the sorcerer's all about harnessing the raw power of magic. They specialize in using meta magic, which is now an encounter resource, so you can use it way more. Sorcery points kind of go away. It's all about meta magic. To make their spells way more powerful than those cast by all other casters. They do lack utility spells, but who cares? You've got some really powerful stuff. So basically, just anyone can cast a fireball. Sorcerers are the ones who say, okay, I'm making this fireball even bigger or harder to resist and all sorts of other shenanigans using their meta magic, which they're able to use a lot more aggressively this time around. So that will shake things up a bit. So you've got a lot of raw power, but that's what Sorcerer's all about, is that raw power of magic. You are learned, not prepared, but it is what it is. Warlock. Still using only simple weapons. They only have light armor. No shields. They have D8 hit dice. They'll have 4 at-will powers, but 2 of which are determined by your primary and secondary archetype. You'll have 3 cantrips, so that's any 3 though. So you don't have a lot of versatility, and you're more offensive than defensive. Kind of the opposite of a cleric, actually. Which is actually fitting. Their encounter abilities, they are a bit less daily dependent still, and they're more encounter-based, with being a pact mage. The only one in the core classes. They learn spells, and they're charisma-based. So, it's pact magic. Going to be progressing a lot smoother this time around, though. At least compared to base 5e. Because, oh boy, that is jank. And also, it should be a lot smoother in general, because everyone has stuff they want to get back each encounter. So, taking short rests is kind of expected of your party now. It is much more of a thing where it's like, yeah, it's encouraged. Take your 30-minute break. Or it might be knocked down to 15, but basically, yeah, take a quick break. It's less than an hour. Easy to fit into your day, even in a dungeon. And all that. Primary archetype, Otherworldly Patron, as you'd expect. Secondary archetype, Pact Boon, as you'd expect. Now, what about those at-will powers? So, how they work is actually a bit special. So, for the Patron at-will power, this will actually be kind of an elemental thing, where if you're the Fiend of, like, Hellfire, and also you will have choices between in each patron, so while you might have the Fiend patron, you could go more of a Hoarfrost route instead of the classic Hellfire route. And, of course, Elemental / Primordial. Yeah, you get to choose the 4 elements. But you get to basically choose an at-will based on that choice, where it's like, well, if you're going the Hellfire route, then you get a Fire at-will. If you're going the Hoarfrost route, you get a Cold at-will. Simple enough, right? As for the Pact Boon at-will, Eldritch Blast is not the be-all end-all of the class. Instead, that is the default at-will for Pact of the Tome. Each Pact Boon will have its own Eldritch at-will. So Pact of the Blade has Eldritch Blade. Pact of the Bow, which is a new one, is going to be Eldritch Arrow. And then Pact of the Chain is going to be Eldritch Claws, which is just like summoning a set of claws to claw opponents. And these will have various class feats that affect them and can modify what they do. But it's not just about Eldritch Blast. And you can choose any Eldritch at-will as any Warlock. So you could actually go 3 Eldritch at-wills if you wanted to, though you're probably gonna not grab Eldritch Blade or Arrow on most builds. Eldritch Arrow in particular, that's kind of like, yeah, that's Pact to the Bows thing. Probably not using it on anyone else, but you get the idea. And Warlocks are still using mysterious powers of dubious acquisition, capable of casting a lot more regularly than most, also bringing their Boon Surge a few times a day to really shake things up in a battle. So Boon Surge is going to be their main daily resource until they start getting to high level and get to Mystic Arcanum, which is returning, but Boon Surge is going to come at the start of the game, and it's currently ideas that it's based on your Pact Boon, so you get something good for melee if you're Pact the Blade, something good for being a dedicated caster if you're Pact the Tome, something summoning related for Pact the Chain, and, well, something ranged weapon based for Pact the Bow. It's not amazingly original, but hey, it's an iterative thing, and, you know, some stuff it's, you know, this is what you'd expect, really, so that's the idea. Last but not least, at least for some people, the Wizard can only use daggers, darts, and quarterstaffs, no armor, d6 hit dice, but now we get to the good part. They only have 4 at-wills, but they do get 5 cantrips, and they get to prepare both. So, like the fighter, you get to prepare all your spells. So yeah, that's what the Wizard gets to do. So they do get a lot more versatility even out of their at-wills. So they may not have 5 at-wills, but they still get plenty of versatility with the ability to prepare them. They are a full caster, still using a spellbook, still int-based, as it should be. But their primary archetype is their Mystical School. Do note that, like in 5e, this is not necessarily linked to the 8 schools of magic that are classically seen in D&D. Those are going to be the first 8 we'd have for this, but there is the room to expand it beyond that. Those are just the 8 common schools of magic, and like the 8 common schools of thought. But there are 2 others, though. One they will explicitly not access, as druids are the masters of these spells, while blade spells, you're not going to have them by default as wizard. I don't know if I'm going to add them later either, but that's because sword mage is planned. But the secondary archetype is your arcane implement. So do you favor using a staff, or do you want to use a wand? Just like 4th edition's original wizard, you get to pick one, and you get to master stuff based on that. So the staff is more defensive, the wand is more offensive, the orb is more controlling, and the others are going to do other stuff. Not entirely sure what they do yet, or what the full list will look like, but you get the arcane implement back. The versatile masters of the arcane, they can access a vast array of options while using focus spells that reflect their mastery with the magics linked to their chosen fields of study. So, focus spells, that is a term returning from Pathfinder 2e. It just kind of felt right that the way that they did it originally in Pathfinder 2e kind of fit Wizard really well, where it's, hey, here's a few things that reflect your mastery of that school of magic, and, you know, are a part of that focus on it. So you get to basically hone in your capabilities with a certain set of magic. So if you're an abjurer, you have a few focus spells that focus on your wards, placing traps, because that's the thing abjuration is going to do, and all sorts of other stuff. So you will have that, and I do plan to let abjurers be a full-on close-range caster, so you will get to go crazy with that. But without further ado, I hope you've enjoyed this video. This has been my kind of ideas for the various classes. for a 6th edition concept in the one I've been working on. Feel free to like and subscribe if you want more videos of my voice. Not sure I'm going to do much more with 6th edition concepts for now. For now being the keyword. Not sure what I'm doing next week. But if you have any thoughts or ideas to expand on this, and your own feedback for it, you can also feel free to comment. I would enjoy that and having discussions with the peoples. Assuming I'm awake at the time. But I will try to reply to all of you. Unless I have a million of you. In which case, yeah, no, I'm not mad. But without further ado, see y'all next time! HaloZoo, out.